All right, so today I'm going to be talking about diversity in technology and how this is not just an issue of race and gender, and how it's actually an issue that we all need to be concerned with, and it impacts people of other groups, not just people from racial minorities or disrepresented groups, and people with different genders, right? So why do we all need to care? One reason is that diverse teams are smarter. MIT has done a study that actually found some interesting results. The smartest teams are not made up of the teams that have the most smart individuals or even one smart individual. They found 3 factors that really influenced how smart, and by smart they define that problem-solving skills, negotiating skills, such things as that. 3 factors. The social sensitivity of the group. How well people within the group can read emotions and such things as that is a big factor. Also, that the groups weren't dominated by just 1 or 2 loud voices. Groups where people participated equally and such were much more successful than groups that had 1 or 2 individuals who were dominating all of the conversations. They also found that the percentage of women in a group affected how successful the teams were. Some people have noted that that could potentially be related to the fact that the average woman in this study had higher average social sensitivity. So 1 and 3 could be related, but there could be some other factors at play there as well. If you guys are interested in looking at this study, I put a link here on the slides for that. So since diverse teams are smarter, we all should want our teams to be diverse, and not just diverse with gender, not just diverse racially, but have different perspectives, different backgrounds from the people within the group. Sometimes people raised in different family styles or people from different places can be raised in ways that lead them to have different personality types and things that help contribute to our groups. So we all know this. Diversity is a problem within tech. If you look at the stats for the US, obviously here, you can see that 53% of the US working economy is male, but in tech it's 75%. And then when you look at the race factors, you can see that the white factor is about equal, but some of the other minorities within there have different representations. So how is open source doing compared to the average tech industry? Actually, we're doing worse than most tech. It might be kind of counterintuitive because a lot of open source works on a meritocracy type basis, and you would think if we're only being valued on what we contribute, then it should be equal. But we're actually finding that that's not true. While women and underrepresented minorities represent 30% of the average tech community, for OpenStack and the Linux kernel community, it's at like 11 and 10%. There's actually a great report that's out on the SuperUser link here that talks about how OpenStack is doing here. And in some areas, OpenStack is doing great. In leadership positions, we're actually doing better than the average tech. There are some places, sexual minorities are actually doing really great within OpenStack versus the regular communities. But in some areas, we still have work to do. So why, even though we are a meritocracy, why do we have this problem more so than the average tech? Some of it could be related to unconscious bias. Now, we all have unconscious bias, and the fact that it's unconscious means we are not aware of it. Some of these things are related to gender. A really famous one that studies find over and over again is related to weight. People who are heavier there's people have an unconscious bias and they assume that they're lazy, right? This was an interesting thing that was found by GitHub. There was a research study done, and I linked it at the bottom here, where on GitHub, code submitted by women was more likely to be accepted than code submitted by men. but only if their gender was not identifiable. Once their gender was identifiable, it went down by 10%. Now, I don't think that most people are trying to discriminate against women or consciously assuming that women are not good coders. So I think this is unconscious bias here. The way we can fight against unconscious bias is just to be aware that it exists. Our experiences lead us into this path. There aren't a lot of technical women, and so we assume that a woman is not technical. Not a great assumption, right? Personality type also plays a role. And I think that if it was easy to measure the personality types that are represented, we would find that even amongst white males, certain personality types are not well represented in tech. It's just not as easy of a thing to do studies on as gender and race is, right? This is classic personality thing where each person is one of the two in each quadrant, right? So you're either an extrovert or an introvert. You're either a thinker or a feeler. The one that always resonates here for me is the thinker versus feeler. I feel like in tech, we have a lot more thinkers than we do feelers, right? You know, thinkers tend to be logic-based, you know, weighs pros and cons, where feelers tend to be more sensitive about the group and others around them. And we need to figure out how we can make sure that what we're doing in open source values people of the various personality types, not just the logic-based thinkers. So what can we do? One, we need to be aware that bias exists, both conscious and unconscious. I truly believe that the OpenStack community is really great about not having open bias. I, as a woman, have never felt anybody here doesn't value me because I'm a woman, right? But we still need to be aware that there could be some unconscious bias at play. We also need to be really careful that we call out bad behavior. Now, bad behavior, I don't mean just people being overtly racist or overtly sexist. Hopefully we all would call that out already, right? By bad behavior, I mean more like open source kind of sometimes has a reputation of being harsh, you know, of being not necessarily welcoming to new people and new ideas. And it only takes a couple of people within a project to really give that project a reputation of being intimidating. So just because somebody is a big contributor doesn't mean we can let them get away with intimidating people, talking down to people. There are ways that you can go about rejecting somebody's contribution without making them feel personally like you're putting them down. These are the behaviors we need to be really careful about. Because one thing that can happen is it's not just the one person who felt put down, but everybody else who's witnessing it. When you're an open source community, a lot of these things are happening on mailing lists or code comments. And if I'm looking into an open source project and I get the feeling that these people are kind of intimidating and frankly mean, I'm not going to contribute to that project. So by letting a couple of bad people give that impression, you can be scaring away a lot of people from your community. A lot of people with different perspectives that could add value. On that point, we need to figure out how to value these different personality types and their contributions. It can't just be about who's putting the most code into the project, right? There are other ways you can contribute. Sometimes they're not easy to identify, and sometimes we don't really put out there well how other people can contribute. For example, there are a lot of projects that have cross-project work, you know, where you really, you know, somebody who is really good at working with multiple teams and understanding, you know, the boundaries and how things need to work together. They might not be somebody who likes to write a ton of code, but they like understanding the technical details. They like working with the teams and figuring out how to collaborate. We need to value those kind of people and that kind of work just as much as people who are dumping thousands of lines of code in. Also, if you think that some people aren't as pushy as others, and by that I mean they're not the kind of people who are going to stand up and really really talk about what they do and what they contribute. They're more quiet about it. They like to give credit to the entire group, right? If you're only valuing those who are going to stand up and be like, well, yeah, I know how to do this, and I know how to do that, and I'm great at this, then you're going to be not valuing a lot of different personality types from different cultural backgrounds, and people who don't like being like that. So we need to make sure that we don't require somebody to really brag about themselves and brag about their abilities in order for us to value them and their contributions. Also, we need to make sure that it's not just a couple of loud voices that are dominating our projects, right? This is where, back to that MIT study, we need to be taking in opinions from everybody in the group. So don't just let a few voices dominate all of our conversations. And I think that means I'm about out of time. Unless anybody has any questions, there are links in my presentations, and they'll be out with the slides you can download. So if you guys want to go and look at the studies and such, there's a lot of interesting information out there.